My name is Rachel Morgan. I served 23 years in the United States Marine Corps, the last 5 as a major general. I've led operations most civilians couldn't even stomach reading about. I've held soldiers in my arms as they bled out, signed off on letters no commander ever wants to write. I've walked through minefields, evacuated civilians under enemy fire, and yes, I've been pinned with medals I never asked for, one of them while laid up in a hospital bed, stitched up and barely breathing, but nothing, not Kandahar, not the midnight extractions, not the day they handed me the Valor Cross, prepared me for what it would feel like to come home. It was my mother's 65th birthday. The party was held at the Langford Room, Everbrook's idea of class and elegance. I walked in alone. Heads turned. Then they turned away just as quickly. My father gave me the same half-smirk he always had, the one I remembered from being 13 and dragging mud into the foyer. My younger sister, Melanie, clinked her wine glass and said, just loud enough to ripple across the room, well, look who finally decided to show up. Didn't realize you still got invited to these things. Her husband laughed behind a bourbon glass like it was the best joke he'd heard all night. My mother looked away. No one stood. No one offered me a chair. I stood there for a second too long before seating myself in the only empty chair right next to the swinging doors to the kitchen. Every few seconds, I caught a breeze of garlic, detergent, and the clatter of dishes. No one asked how I'd been. One of my uncles joked about whether I'd started looking for grocery store jobs now that I was retired. I didn't respond. Just smiled faintly, letting it all smolder beneath my skin. What they didn't know. I had just declined a classified position at the Pentagon because I couldn't in good conscience approve a weapons deal that smelled dirty. I still had a scar just under my collarbone from a bullet that nearly ended me. And only days earlier, I signed the guardianship papers for the teenage daughter of a fellow Marine who died under my command, but all they saw was a washed-up soldier who didn't know how to play nice at dinner parties. Just as dessert was being passed around, a voice cut through the silverware and background murmurs. Sharp, deliberate, clearly military. Excuse me, he said, stepping up to our table. Ma'am. Welcome back. Major General Morgan. You could have heard a fork hit the floor. I hadn't been back to Everbrook in over 14 years. 14 years of sand, sweat, lost sleep, and lost friends. I'd spent more time writing condolence letters than birthday cards. And now I was back. Sitting at a birthday party where no one asked me how I was, no one even looked me in the eye. I wore the only pair of heels I still owned. A navy dress. Hair pinned back the way I used to for formal briefings. When I checked in at the front, the hostess looked at her tablet and asked, "You're with the Morgan party?" Like I was crashing some event, she walked me to the far end of the candlelit table, right beside the kitchen. Every time the door swung open, cold air rushed past. I sat in silence. Pretending it didn't matter. She's back, huh? I thought she was still deployed. Still not married? I picked up my glass of water and stared through it like a lens, hoping their words would dissolve into the hum of clinking glasses and jazz music. But they didn't. They never did. Then came Melanie, always a showstopper. She arrived fashionably late, dressed like she was on the red carpet. Crimson gown. Stiletto heels. Her hair cascading in those glossy Hollywood waves. She walked straight to the head of the table and kissed the mayor on the cheek like they were family. It's such an honor, she beamed, to lead New Horizon into its next chapter. She didn't look at me. Not even a glance. Our mother stood to speak. Her voice, crystal clear across the cutlery and low chatter. She spoke of family, resilience, and blessings. She congratulated Melanie's nonprofit. Gave props to our cousin for getting into med school. Bragged about a 5-year-old winning a spelling bee. She never once mentioned her daughter who had worn the American flag across 3 continents. I raised my glass anyway. Because my hand needed something to do. A great-aunt leaned toward me, her glasses resting at the tip of her nose. What do you do in the military, dear? Logistics? food rations? Something like that? I smiled politely. Something like that. She seemed satisfied. The real answer wouldn't have fit into her version of patriotism anyway. And honestly, I was too tired to explain myself to people who had already decided who I was. After the cake was served and the room began to lose its buzz, Melanie made her way to me. She leaned down, syrup-sweet voice barely above a whisper, "You really shouldn't have come. Mom didn't want tonight to feel overshadowed." I just looked at her. This was the same girl who begged me not to leave for boot camp. The same girl who never wrote me once I did. Who copied my homework in high school, then blamed me when she got caught. And now she was rewriting history like I was a ghost she had to explain away. I said nothing, because I already knew her story, the one she'd crafted so carefully. It was about to fall apart, they just didn't know it yet. The next morning, my motel room smelled like bleach and air conditioning. Nothing else. No one had offered me a place to stay. Not out of politeness. Not even out of image. I wasn't the kind of guest you took pictures with and posted online. The only message on my phone was from my father. "Thanks for coming. Your mother's tired, not up for visitors." I left the phone face down on the nightstand and stepped out into Everbrook's two familiar streets. I didn't have a plan. I just needed to breathe air that didn't feel laced with memory, but this town had a funny way of steering you straight into things you weren't looking for. A few blocks later, I found myself in front of New Horizon, Melanie's boutique nonprofit/personal brand. The glass window out front was covered with a glossy life-size promotional banner. And there she was, Melanie, standing tall in a crisp navy military-style dress, brass buttons gleaming, heels picture-perfect. A bronze star pinned neatly to her chest. Except it wasn't just any bronze star. It was the old model. The one with the flawed engraving that had been recalled over 10 years ago. That design was pulled before it was ever supposed to be distributed. The only way she could have gotten one was if it had been discarded. Or stolen, and there she was. Wearing it like it was just another accessory. Beneath the image, in bold letters, the caption read, "From family legacy to civic duty." That's when I remembered what she'd said the night before, half laughing over champagne. My sister tried the military thing, but it wasn't for her. I learned from her mistakes. I stared up at the banner, my mouth dry, my stomach tight and cold. I didn't go inside. Didn't make a scene. I just turned and walked. Fast. Toward the one place in town that still smelled like part of my childhood, Morgan's Books. My dad's shop, the bell above the door still jingled. Still smelled like dust and yellowing paper. I stepped inside, walked past the same old travel section and worn leather chairs. And there, on his desk, was a frame, a certificate with my name on it, but not my rank. Not my photo. Not the medals I'd earned. Just some sanitized version of me. Cropped. Altered. Invented. I picked it up just as my father stepped out of the back. He froze when he saw what I was holding, said nothing. "Why?" I asked. He rubbed his jaw and said, "Your mother didn't want people thinking you, killed people." "Melanie fits better," he added. "She's more public friendly." I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. I just folded the certificate, once, sharply, and slipped it into my coat pocket. I hadn't planned on attending Melanie's big gala fundraiser. But after seeing that bronze star in her window and that forged certificate on my father's desk, something inside me shifted. It wasn't rage. It was something colder. Clearer. I needed to see what lie she was telling next. The Everbrook Country Club ballroom was gleaming. Polished hardwood. Crystal chandeliers. A jazz quartet in the corner and a sea of people whose smiles looked laminated. I checked the seating chart, table 12, right next to the restrooms and a service station. The woman across from me didn't look up from her phone the whole time. The man next to me was already halfway into his second bourbon and softly humming with the band, off-key, fine by me. I didn't come for conversation. About halfway through the night, a tall, silver-haired man took the stage. Navy suit, polished shoes, a smile that lived in his chin, Elliot Crane. Melanie's biggest donor and her self-declared mentor. Tonight, he began, we celebrate vision, determination, and resilience. Melanie Morgan is the face of a future unburdened by the shadows of the past. Even with a family name once marred by military scandal, she has risen above. I blinked. Scandal? I had never been investigated. Then I remembered the whispers. The rumors that had followed me after Kandahar. I'd been medevaced mid-mission, caught a piece of shrapnel while pulling a corporal from a burning vehicle. There were always skeptics. People who didn't read the reports, who believed the worst, because the truth was less exciting, but I'd written the report. I'd been cleared. That should have been the end of it. Apparently, someone wanted to drag the ghost back out of the files. I slipped away from the table, my heels soft against the marble floor. I just needed a second of air. A second where no one was spinning the story for me. That's when I heard them, two voices. Behind the catering door, muffled. But close enough. One of them was Melanie. She never defends herself, she whispered. That's the best part. Crane says if things ever get messy, we've got that old letter she wrote. The one about her squad mate? It's all we'd need. My chest went hollow. There was only one letter she could be talking about, the one I wrote from a hospital bed. Morphine in my veins. Gauze pressed to my ribs. I'd written that letter to protect someone. To take the fall for a decision that wasn't exactly regulation, but one that had saved lives. Captain Marcus Bennett, he'd made a call in the field. Diverted the evac route to save civilians, families, kids. It went against orders. But it worked. The fallout? It could have cost him everything. So I wrote the letter. Took the responsibility. Told Command it was my call. He died a week later. Now Melanie had that letter. Or Crane did, and they were holding it like a loaded weapon. Back at the motel, I sat in the dark. The only sound was the low hum of the air conditioner and the buzz in my own head. That letter. I hadn't thought about it in years. I wrote it with blood on my boots and bandages on my chest. It wasn't a confession. It was a decision. A way to shield a man who didn't deserve to be chewed up and spit out by bureaucracy. Captain Marcus Bennett had made a split-second call in Kandahar. He diverted our evac route, broke protocol, because there were families trapped in a collapsed school near our extraction point. His move saved over a dozen civilians. But Command didn't care about the nuance. They wanted clean paperwork. And when things got messy, someone always paid, so I stepped in. I took the heat. Now that letter, buried for years, was in the hands of people who were using it as leverage. Spinning a false narrative for personal gain. I felt it in my bones. This wasn't just manipulation. This was theft. Weaponized. I pulled the dented deployment trunk out of the motel closet. Still smelled faintly of diesel and sand. The latches were stiff, but I managed to pry it open. Inside were old uniforms, wrapped up briefings, maps. And at the very bottom, tucked beneath a rolled-up flak vest, a weathered folder, the letter. My handwriting, and beneath it, something wrapped in cloth. I unfolded the fabric slowly, and there it was, the silver falcon pin, no bigger than my thumb. Smooth edges. Simple design. Marcus had given it to me the night before the Kandahar mission. You're the one who'll do the right thing, he said, even if it burns. I turned it over in my palm, and that's when I felt it, a seam. Subtle. A faint edge along the back of the pin. My heart jumped. I took my utility knife and gently pried it open. Inside, tucked behind the backing plate, was a micro SD card. My hands trembled as I slotted it into my laptop. The screen flickered. It took a few seconds. Then a folder popped up, Kfield_confidential, 3 audio files. I clicked play on the first one, a voice I didn't recognize, gravelly, calm. Manifest says medical supplies. You and I both know that crate holds ordnance. We move it before the UN sweep, no questions. My stomach dropped, the second file. Another voice. Urgent. Familiar, Marcus, you can't run weapons through a shelter zone, he said. There are families in there. Kids. The final file, if I don't make it, Marcus said, his voice low, measured, tell Morgan. She'll know what to do. I leaned back in the chair. Closed my eyes, it all made sense now. Marcus hadn't just died in a war zone. He'd died standing in someone's way. And now I had proof. The National Veterans Conference in Chicago was packed. Cameras. Banners. Protesters yelling from across the street. Some waved flags. Others held signs, let the truth speak. No more silent medals. I walked through it all, head high, step steady. Conrad Sanderson, a federal attorney and veteran advocate, met me backstage. He didn't waste time. You back down now, he said quietly, and they'll write the story for you. I nodded, the lights dimmed. The auditorium filled with whispers and camera clicks. I stepped onto the stage in a plain black suit. No ribbons. No brass. Just my name and the truth. I paused, then spoke. I used to think honor was something someone else gave you. I said. But war teaches you otherwise. Honor is what you protect when no one else will. I tapped a remote, the giant screen behind me lit up. First, Kandahar. Photos of rubble. Civilians in dust-covered clothing. Smoke curling into gray skies. Then came the audio. Marcus's voice echoed through the auditorium, you can't run weapons through a shelter zone. There are families in there. Silence, then the final clip, if I don't make it. Tell Morgan. She'll know what to do. I let the silence linger, then, from the side of the stage, a legal officer in full military dress stepped forward. This recording has been authenticated, he announced. General Rachel Morgan is not. And has never been, under investigation. She is a federally protected witness under Section 11B. Her testimony is part of an ongoing federal inquiry. One clap. Then another, then the entire room was on its feet. A reporter called out from the front row, General Morgan, what do you say to people who accuse you of surviving while others didn't? I looked out at the crowd. Faces turned toward me, searching. I survived, I said, and I've used that survival to say what the dead can't. As I stepped off the stage, I caught a glimpse of the last row, my mother. Standing. Tears running down her face, my father. Hand over his heart, but I didn't stop. I didn't wait for their apology. This wasn't about being accepted, this was about never letting anyone bury the truth again. 2 days later, Elliot Crane's name exploded across every major news outlet, veteran scandal uncovered. Illegal arms deal tied to nonprofit donor. Crane under federal investigation for fraud, bribery, and obstruction. By noon, footage of him being led away in handcuffs outside his estate in Westbridge was on every screen from here to D.C. He didn't look powerful anymore, just small, gray, and cornered. His smile was gone. The weight of truth finally snapped something in that perfect image he wore like armor. A Department of Justice rep called me that afternoon. You're officially registered under 11B protection. The agent said. You're now classified as a federal whistleblower. There'll be monitoring, protocols, expect some eyes on you. But you did the right thing, General. I thanked them. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt heavy. Justice always comes late. And never clean. When I finally returned to Everbrook, the sky hung low and gray, the kind of clouds that made everything look faded. My parents had invited me over, first time in years they'd asked anything of me. I stood in front of the house for a minute before walking in. Same front porch. Same 2 chipped steps. Inside, not much had changed. The same beige carpet, same couch cushions that dipped too deep. But the silence was different. My mother sat at the edge of the sofa. She didn't try to hug me. Just folded her hands in her lap and stared at the floor. I was afraid, she said. Her voice was small. Unsteady, afraid of how far you'd gone. Afraid you wouldn't come back. So I started grieving before you ever left. She paused. But I let her go on, I thought. If we pretended you were something simpler, something softer, we wouldn't have to explain the hard parts. Wouldn't have to admit we were never brave enough to follow you. Across the room, my father stood at the bookshelf. Reached up. Took down the framed certificate, the forged one. He stared at it for a moment, then, without a word, he tore it in half. No drama. No explanation, just honesty. I didn't have the courage to stand with you, he said, his voice low and rough. But I see now, it was your courage that stood for all of us. I didn't cry, I didn't rush to forgive them, but I nodded. Because sometimes silence says what words never can. 2 days later, I went to see Melanie. Her office, if you could still call it that, was almost empty. The shelves were bare. Her laptop sat closed beside a box filled with framed photos and inspirational quotes that now rang a little too hollow. She didn't look up when I walked in. Just sat on the edge of her chair, her posture small and tired. They pulled everything, she said. The board, the grants, the endorsements. Someone leaked that the metal in my promotional banner was fake. She laughed. A single, sharp breath. More of a sigh. I didn't think it mattered. I just wanted Mom to look at me the way she looks at you. She finally met my eyes, but I forgot what you had to survive to earn that look. Her voice cracked. I gave them the letter, she confessed. I didn't even read it. Crane's team said it was for background vetting. I skimmed it. Didn't know what they'd do with it. I didn't know it would destroy you. I let her words sit there, long enough to make her squirm. Not out of cruelty, but because she needed to feel the weight of what she'd done. Finally, I said, you don't need to be me, Melanie. But you need to stop turning other people's battles into your stage. My tone wasn't angry. Just clear. She didn't argue. Didn't cry. She just nodded, and for the first time I think she understood. She saw the line between admiration and theft, and realized she'd crossed it. 3 months later, the Marcus Bennett Veterans Resource Center opened its doors on the outskirts of Everbrook. The town that once looked past me now stood shoulder to shoulder in the early morning light. Flags lined the pathway. People gathered in quiet solidarity. There were no press stunts. No camera crews. No overpolished speeches, exactly how Marcus would have wanted it. Inside the main entrance, a glass case held the silver falcon pin, polished but worn. Below it, a plaque read, "Proof of survival. Promise to speak." I stood beside it in full dress uniform, not for recognition, but for remembrance. Next to me, Lily, Marcus's daughter, held a photo of her father. She was 13 now. Taller. Quieter. But strong in the way kids are when they've had to grow up early. She didn't speak. Didn't need to. Her presence was louder than any tribute. Toward the back of the room, I saw Melanie. No makeup. No spotlight. Just her, wearing a white blouse, hands folded, eyes locked on mine, and this time, she didn't look away. A reporter caught me just as I stepped outside the center. He wasn't pushy, just curious. "General Morgan," he asked, "after everything, what matters most to you now?" I paused. Looked back at Lily, standing beside that silver falcon. At the plaque. At the townspeople, veterans, families, civilians, standing still in the morning light. "That this place stays standing," I said. "And that the truth stands with it." It wasn't a line. It was the only thing I had left to offer. Later that day, I walked the familiar streets of Everbrook, not to visit anyone, not for some grand moment, but because I needed to feel the ground beneath me. The same sidewalks I used to bike on. The same benches my mom and I sat on after school. Nothing had changed. And everything had. I stopped by Morgan's books one last time. The bell still jingled. Inside, my father was shelving paperbacks in the history section. He looked up, nodded, and said, "You got time for coffee?" I nodded. He didn't try to apologize again. He didn't need to. We sat in silence, sipping bitter coffee from chipped mugs. It wasn't perfect. But it was something. Progress. My mother joined us halfway through. No tears. Just a warm scarf draped around her shoulders and that careful, familiar glance that mothers give when they're trying to reconnect without spooking the moment. "I started writing again," she said. I raised an eyebrow. "Just journaling." "But I wrote about you." I didn't say anything. Just took another sip. Later, as I stood to leave, she touched my hand gently. "I know I can't undo the way we failed you," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "But I hope I get to witness the way you rise next." I gave a small smile. "You already are." Outside, I found Melanie sitting alone on a park bench near the edge of the square. She wasn't dressed up. No heels. Just sneakers, jeans, and a windbreaker. She looked like someone who'd taken off a heavy mask and was finally learning how to breathe again. I sat down beside her. She didn't say anything for a while. Then finally, "You know, I used to tell people I admired you. But really, I envied you. And envy makes people do really stupid things." She looked over at me. "I'm sorry. Not because I got caught. But because I finally understand what I stole. And what I ignored." I nodded slowly. "It's not about medals, Mel," I said. "It's about what we carry when no one's watching. And how we choose to carry it." She took a breath and gave a short nod. "I've got some rebuilding to do." "Start with yourself," I said. "Not your brand." She let out a small laugh. "Yeah. That's probably a first." We sat there for a while longer, letting the wind pass through, saying nothing. Sometimes silence says everything. Weeks later, I got a letter from the Department of Defense. Not an assignment. Not a recall. Just a formal invitation to serve on a congressional panel on ethics and whistleblower protections. I accepted, because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that real service doesn't end when the war does. And sometimes, the most important battles happen far from the battlefield, in boardrooms, in small-town politics, and yes, even around a birthday table where nobody saves you a seat. The Marcus Bennett Center thrived. Lily came by often, sometimes just to sit, sometimes to ask questions about her dad. I never lied to her. Never sugar-coated anything. She deserved more than folded flags and sanitized stories. She deserved the truth. And when she asked why I kept speaking up, even when it hurt, I told her simply, because silence can be a kind of betrayal. And some people never get to speak for themselves. She understood more than most adults ever will. In time, the story changed, not because I rewrote it, but because I refused to let anyone else do it for me. I wasn't the sister who left. I wasn't the general who disappeared. I was the woman who came back, scarred, yes. Changed, deeply. But unafraid to stand alone, if it meant standing in the light. And the town that once looked away, now it listens. There's something deeply unsettling about returning home to find that your story, the truth of who you are, has already been rewritten without your consent. It's even more painful when that rewriting comes from the people who were supposed to know you best, love you most, and stand by you when the world didn't. This story wasn't just about one woman's military service or her decorated rank. It wasn't about the scars she wore beneath her collar or the missions most people couldn't bear to read about. This was about the silence she endured when she came home. About being invisible in the room where her own family celebrated everyone but her. About what it feels like to be present, but excluded. Visible, but erased. Rachel Morgan's journey teaches us one undeniable truth: honor isn't something bestowed by others, It's something you protect when no one else will. We live in a time when public image often replaces private integrity, where curated feeds and carefully staged moments are confused with real worth. Rachel's sister wore a medal she didn't earn, spoke in soundbites she didn't live, and leveraged another person's sacrifice to elevate her own profile, and yet, Rachel didn't fight back with cruelty. She didn't retaliate with vengeance, she chose clarity. She chose truth, and when the time came, she let the evidence speak louder than anger ever could. This story reminds us that surviving something doesn't just mean living through it. It means carrying the truth of it forward, even when it's heavy. Especially when it's inconvenient. It's easy to admire courage in hindsight, to cheer when the truth comes out, to stand and clap when a whistleblower gets vindicated on stage. But what about the years before that moment? The quiet motel rooms, the cold stares, the dinner tables where no one saves you a seat. That's the part we don't talk about. That's the part that breaks people, but Rachel didn't break. She stood, and by standing, she did something so few dare to do. She made space for others to speak. When she opened the Marcus Bennett Veterans Resource Center, it wasn't just a tribute to a fallen comrade. It was a declaration: this is what truth looks like when it's honored, not hidden. And it gave a voice to all the veterans who came home and felt erased, to all the families who lost someone and were handed nothing but silence in return. Her sister Melanie eventually saw the line she'd crossed, the one between admiration and theft. And that moment, quiet, raw, with no spotlight, was redemption. Not through speeches or photo ops, but through finally seeing someone else's pain without trying to repurpose it. The real legacy of this story isn't medals or news headlines, it's memory. It's dignity, it's the act of standing beside someone when no one else will. Small blue diamond. If this story moved you, please hit the like button. It tells the platform this video matters, and it helps the message reach more people who may need to hear it. Small blue diamond. Drop a comment below. Have you ever felt like your truth was ignored? That someone else tried to rewrite your story? Share it. Your story matters. And this is a space where it will be seen. Small blue diamond. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We share real, human stories, stories that challenge what we think we know about strength, survival, and the quiet power of standing up when everyone else sits down. Small blue diamond. Share this video with someone who's been silenced, misunderstood, or forgotten. Let them know they're not alone. That their voice matters, even when it shakes. Even when no one claps. Small blue diamond. And finally, live with courage, not the loud kind that demands attention, but the steady kind that keeps going when the lights are off and the room is empty, because somewhere out there, someone's watching how you carry the truth, and maybe, just maybe, your courage will give them permission to carry their own. In a world full of curated narratives, be the one who chooses truth over applause, integrity over image, and memory over myth. This wasn't just Rachel Morgan's story, it was a mirror for all of us, and what we do next, that's our legacy.